So this is a topic I've seen requested a couple times here on the channel, and admittedly it wasn't one I myself had put much thought into, but I do suppose it could be an interesting one to talk about given I provide just that. A while ago, last month I believe, I uploaded a video that tackled pretty much the reverse of this topic. In that video we explored what could have potentially happened if the king's firstborn son, Baelon Targaryen, actually survived his infancy and was able to grow. Feel free to check that video out in my What If playlist. You guys seem to like it. It was fairly simple with some big changes, and change is something we do really well here on this channel. So without further ado, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and let's get into the video. In episode 1 of House of the Dragon, King Viserys has a bit of a dilemma, which if we're being honest sums up majority of his reign, but I digress. As the man who wears the crown, Viserys has power over various lands, titles, and resources in the kingdoms, nigh absolute power. But as a high-ranking official in the Kingdom of Westeros, one thing is valued far more than lands, titles, and crowns: heirs. Heirs are arguably what keeps the wheel of Westeros turning. What's the point of having lands, having titles, crowns, and resources if you have no one to pass them on to? This is the main problem of King Viserys. Despite how much he loves his wife Aemma Arryn, she's only given him one child, a daughter named Rhaenyra. And when it comes to ruling Westeros, women aren't exactly favored in that regard. For the Lords of the Realm, by tradition and precedent, it must be a son who inherits after the father. Though there are some exceptions to this rule, like Lady Jane in The Vale. She's a woman, yet she rules House Arryn despite not being a male. She has no brothers, but she does have male cousins, and they don't necessarily like that she rules over them. Then there's also Lady Rhea Royce, the first wife of Daemon Targaryen, whom he murdered. She has male cousins, but they all seem pretty accepting of her ruling more than anyone else. But I digress. Due to the tradition and precedent, Viserys believes he has to have a son to inherit his throne, and because of a dream plaguing him for years, he believes his wife Emma's current pregnancy is indeed a son.
This child is a boy, Emma.
Yeah.
I'm certain of it. I've never been more certain of anything.
But there's a problem. Despite being so positive about this pregnancy, his wife is very concerned. This isn't the first time that she's been pregnant. Obviously, since Rhaenyra is around, but Rhaenyra is the only child she's had that not only survived infancy, but lived to adulthood. She and Viserys have been doing this dance for years, and practically every time she gets pregnant and gives birth, something goes wrong. She's lost many children before their time, so whether this baby is a boy is the least of her concerns.
I've lost one babe in the cradle, had 2 stillbirths and 2 pregnancies ended well before their term. That's 5 in twice as many years.
Part of the reason Aemma has such difficulty giving birth is because she's been impregnated so many times from such a young age. In the book, she got married to Viserys around 11, and it says she got pregnant pretty early on in their marriage. So imagine all the stress being put on her body from these pregnancies with so little reprieve. It's no wonder that she's concerned. But Viserys has faith, or rather has deluded himself into thinking that things will be fine, because in his dreams he saw a boy wearing the Conqueror's crown, seated upon the Iron Throne. Dragon dreams are littered throughout House Targaryen, and they are infamous because they're cryptic and never play out the way you think. Most people just assume their meaning, taking them at face value and seeing what they want to see. But in reality, though they do come true, it's not in the way that you expect. Viserys believes that the boy in his dreams is his son with Aemma, so he holds fast to the idea that everything will go well. But it's only when Aemma goes into labor that the grim reality really sets in. Aemma is having difficulty delivering, and it's unclear if mother or child will survive, so the king is presented with a choice.
During a difficult birth, it sometimes becomes necessary for the father to make an impossible choice.
Well, speak it.
To sacrifice one, or to lose them both.
In canon, Viserys decides to sacrifice his wife for the sake of his son. For his dream. They cut her open like an animal and deliver the child into the world. It's an agonizing fate for the queen, but her son lives and the king finally has an heir. Though it's only for a day, as mere hours later, his son dies. The king and his daughter are left shattered. And like with Baelon, the death of the queen is one in a series of unfortunate events that leads to the dreaded Dance of the Dragons. With her gone, there's a vacancy in the royal family, one many are eager to fill, like the Lord of the Tides and the Hand of the King. In the canon timeline, Otto manages to move Alicent into place as the king's new queen, and from her stems the bloodline of the Greens, which end up playing a rather pivotal role in the war for succession. But what if this never came to pass? What if Viserys made a different choice that day his wife died? What if he left it to the gods and they took his son but left his love? What if Aemma survived? We'll set the stage in episode 1. The heirs tournament is in full swing, and Queen Aemma is in the midst of giving birth to Prince Baelon. Viserys has been called to be with her, and it's clear that the delivery is taking its toll. It's unclear whether his wife or unborn child will survive, though. So the Maester makes the king an offer. They could save the child, but it would be at the cost of the mother. Viserys is very reluctant to make this decision. He loves Aemma dearly and doesn't want to be responsible for her death. But he also needs an heir, and his dreams showed him that he would have a son. Killing his wife couldn't possibly be the only way to make that dream a reality. Could it? So he contemplates and laments this situation. Was having a son really worth it if he lost the love of his life? Orphaning his daughter and unborn child. The gods couldn't be that cruel, could they? They were the ones who sent him that dream, showing him a son sat upon the Iron Throne. His wife's suffering couldn't be for nothing. So, in this timeline, Viserys decided to have faith. Like his brother Daemon in canon, when he was offered the choice of killing Laena for the sake of his unborn child. He refuses. Whether he loved Laena or not, he didn't want her blood on his hands. Nor does Viserys when it comes to Aemma. So it's left with the gods. It's a long and hard labor, but this time, unlike in canon, Aemma actually manages to deliver baby Baelon, and for a brief moment, Viserys is the happiest man alive. His wife is alive. His son is alive. He finally has a male heir. Aemma is happy. Exhausted, but happy that she was able to finally fulfill her duty to Viserys. And now she doesn't have to worry about having any more children. By all accounts, it's a joyous day for the realm, and the people rejoice when Viserys announces the birth of his new son to the masses at the tourney. Even Rhaenyra is happy. Despite feeling overlooked by her dad sometimes, she's just happy he finally has what he wanted, and most of all, that her mother is okay. But what should be the brightest day for the realm becomes one of the darkest, because mere hours later, Prince Baelon dies. Aemma and Viserys are shattered. The thing they suffered so hard for, a male heir, is gone in an instant. But this time, he didn't take his mother with him. So when the funeral comes, Baelon is alone on the pyre. Aemma is with Viserys, the two of them leaning on one another, heartbroken. Aemma possibly more than Viserys. She feels like she failed, as if she did something wrong or has been doing something wrong. Even though it isn't her fault, and Viserys tells her this, she thinks about all the other pregnancies before this one. Rhaenyra was the only one to survive, and she can't help but wonder why. Viserys is lost. He dreamed that he would have a son that would sit the Iron Throne, and now he's gone. Who was his dream for, if not Baelon? That's a question for later, though. In this timeline, since Viserys didn't have to suffer the tragedy of losing both his wife and son, he's not as distraught as he was in canon. He's still distressed, but this time he's able to give the order to burn Baelon's pyre instead of Rhaenyra. Speaking of which, Rhaenyra also has a less strained relationship with her father earlier on now that her mother is still alive. In canon, Rhaenyra kind of blamed Viserys for her death. After all, it was his ambition for a son that got her killed. And, not to mention, despite his love for her, she didn't feel truly seen by him because he wanted a son so badly. But now, Baelon is dead and Aemma is still alive. She's hurt over the loss, but not as bad as she was before, since it was just him this time. Baelon was too young for her to have a deep connection with. While she feels his loss, it's not the same as losing the woman who raised her for years. So I imagine she'll be a bit closer with her dad since her mom is still here. More sympathetic towards him too. This also means that since Aemma is alive, we don't get those moments where Alicent and Rhaenyra kind of bond over her loss. Because, like Rhaenyra, Alicent also lost her mom at a young age. But this time, as I just said, it was only Baelon. And while it hurts and she grieves for him, it's not the same since she never got the chance to really know him. But moving on. The king and queen spend a lot of time together after the passing. This is kinda good for Viserys since last time he was mostly alone, but now he has his wife to lean on. But like in canon, once again, the topic of his succession will be brought up. It may not be as soon as it happened before, because the urgency, I would argue, would not be the same in this timeline. In canon, both the queen and her son died, and Viserys most likely wasn't getting remarried anytime soon after a loss like that. For the time being, there was no hope for the king producing any other potential heir since his wife died and he was grieving. And during that period where he was grieving, anything could have happened to him. So it was very important that they jumped on his succession. But with Aemma still being alive, there would be some hope that at some point they could try again to conceive and produce an heir. Little do they know, though, Aemma said Baelon was the last child she would ever give Viserys, and this will become an issue later on. But for now, what are some changes that we see as a result of Aemma's survival? For starters, since Aemma is alive, there is not a vacancy in the royal family, so Corlys and Otto won't be pushing their daughters to be the next queen, at least not at the moment. And since Alicent won't be queen anytime soon, she may end up keeping her friendship with Rhaenyra as well. And since she never becomes queen, this could wipe out the entire Green bloodline before it ever starts, meaning Rhaenyra is an only child. Since if Aemma holds fast to not bearing any more children, she won't have much competition. Unless you want to count Daemon. I imagine this timeline, Daemon would still say his heir for a day speech. I doubt he'll be more sensitive towards Viserys just because Aemma is alive. After all, if he was willing to say this when his brother's wife and son died, then Aemma being alive means absolutely nothing. This would obviously infuriate Viserys, maybe even more than in the original timeline because his wife is alive and Baelon isn't the only child she lost. So to mock Baelon's death is like mocking the suffering she endured for years, and this promptly results in Daemon being disinherited. Which brings into question, who will inherit the Iron Throne? The obvious answer is Rhaenyra, because in canon, after sending his brother away, he names her heir almost immediately. But I don't see Viserys naming his daughter heir just yet. At least not immediately, because there's not a need for it. Even though he doesn't have a clear heir, Aemma is still alive. He still has a queen, and though things had been rough to say the least, she was able to produce at least one child, Rhaenyra. So as long as Aemma is around, there's always that hope that one day they may conceive again. Even though she told him that she was done having kids, I could easily see Viserys being so obsessed with the idea that it has to be their son that inherits the Iron Throne, he tries to convince her otherwise, or at least tries to wait for her to change her mind so they can try again. And that's not to mention, one of the main reasons he made Rhaenyra heir in the first place is because of what happened to Aemma originally. While in the beginning he does say he believes in her, he makes it clear later on that one of, if not the main motivation for making Rhaenyra his heir, wasn't necessarily because he believed in her, but because he felt guilty about killing her mother and wanted to set things right.
Viserys.
I thought Rhaenyra was the way out of my abyss of grief and regret. And naming her heir would begin to set things right.
But here, Aemma is alive and well. For the most part, she's still most likely very torn up about Baelon. And that same guilt that he had over orphaning Rhaenyra wouldn't be there. In fact, despite yearning for a son with his wife, he'd probably feel more guilty towards Aemma than anyone else for making her conceive so many times. So in this timeline, he doesn't feel as obligated to Rhaenyra. So in this timeline, he'd probably hold off on naming a new heir, because he's convinced that one day he and Eva may just have a son. It just needs time until she's ready again. But as the months pass and it becomes clear that Aemma has no desire to have more kids because she can't deal with the stress and trauma, we begin to have a problem. And then we have a discussion about who the king's heir will be. Then these months later, where we were originally discussing who the king would marry, are now turning to discussions about who the king's heir will be. Naturally, this falls to Rhaenyra, not out of guilt this time, but because she's pretty much the only choice, unless you want to hand the crown off to the Velaryons, or bring Daemon back in, and Viserys isn't doing that anytime soon. Rhaenyra being named heir, I would imagine, would stress Aemma out a bit, because Westeros has never had a queen before, and a lot of men aren't going to take that too kindly. Daemon might be one of them. Aemma is a character from what little we've seen and known who seems to have accepted her role in Westerosi society, and probably wants that for her daughter too. She doesn't like when Rhaenyra is in potentially dangerous situations, like when she rides dragons, and she even says that bearing children is how women like them serve the realm. So making Rhaenyra a girl heir is very dangerous because of the resistance that she could face. So I could see her freaking out a little bit, kinda like Rhaenys does when Corlys wants to marry off Laenor.
We are placing our son in danger. Rhaenyra's succession will be challenged. Knives will come out for her, her husband, and for their heirs.
But there isn't much she can do since she's not going to be bearing any more children for Viserys. And once again, like I said before, this is a problem. People at court, especially the King's Small Council, are going to start picking up on the fact that the Queen won't be conceiving anymore. And this may trigger discussions for the King to set Aemma aside. Sure, he loves her, but the Targaryen line at this point is very thin. The main Targaryen family only has 3 active members. I'm not including Rhaenys because she's a Velaryon by marriage and so are her children, which only leaves Viserys, Daemon, and Rhaenyra. Viserys isn't having any children with his wife, Daemon refuses to even go near his wife, and Rhaenyra, for the time being, is unmarried. If anything were to happen, the Targaryen line might just be screwed, so it's imperative that the king has more heirs in case anything were to happen. Honestly, I could even see Aemma being on board with this, albeit reluctantly. She loves Viserys, but also from what little we see of her character, she truly cares whether or not her duties have been fulfilled.
I know it is my duty to provide you an heir. And I'm sorry if I have failed you in that I am. But I've mourned all the dead children I can.
She feels like she failed Viserys for not giving him a son, and as king he must have a male heir. That's what the realm would prefer over Rhaenyra. This could also play into her mindset. As a woman, Rhaenyra will always be challenged, but perhaps if Viserys had a son, that wouldn't be the case. Rhaenyra could be protected, kept out of the limelight, since a boy would be more acceptable. But it seems that she's unable to provide that, so maybe it would be better for Viserys to find someone who could. But knowing how much Viserys actually loves Aemma, he would never do this. This is the love of his life, mother of his child. Was he just supposed to send her back to the Vale to a family she barely even knows now? Or have her stay at court, her home, while he slept with another woman in their bed and produced more children? That would be cruel, and last time I checked, his name was not Maegor. So setting Aemma aside is out of the question for Viserys. But I could still see people like Otto and Corlys trying to push their daughters towards the king like they did in canon to try and make him change his mind. But of course, this isn't gonna work since Viserys isn't in that same vulnerable state he was in canon. So the natural direction I see this heading, assuming that Viserys stays absolutely loyal to Aemma no matter what, there's going to be a lot more pressure on Rhaenyra now. Since her mother won't be having any more children, it'll be up to her to secure the family line. This could perhaps mean she gets married to Laenor Velaryon a lot earlier than she did before. This marriage could end up taking the place of King Viserys' wedding to Alicent. This could result in Viserys aiding Corlys in the Stepstones due to the marriage pact, and most likely the support of his wife. This means that Daemon won't be the king of the Narrow Seas. We'll say he probably goes off to Pentos to make his name there, maybe even making an entrance later at Rhaenyra's wedding to Laenor. Aemma might feel a way about it though, since he insulted her dead son. But all in all, as I think about this topic, I don't necessarily see a war in the future. Since Alicent never became the queen, she never ruined her friendship with Rhaenyra and never mothered the Greens. Since Rhaenyra doesn't have any siblings, or more accurately, a brother to compete with, I don't really see a civil war breaking out unless Daemon feels like he should really be the one on the Iron Throne. At this point, it doesn't really matter if Rhaenyra sleeps with Daemon or has bastards, because who's fit enough to rally against her? Aegon II worked because he was a male, the king's firstborn son. He had a valid claim to the Iron Throne. People wanted and expected him to be king, and Rhaenyra having bastards was just another reason to rally behind the true-born male heir. But since Rhaenyra has no siblings or a brother, there's no one to prop up in opposition against her. Especially not Daemon, since Otto hates him, and if Corlys gets a marriage pact with the Targs, you already know he doesn't care about gender, so he may not risk backing Daemon if he tried something. So like with my What If Baelon Lived video, I see a more peaceful outcome for the Targaryen family for the time being, assuming that Viserys and Aemma have no more children. But even if they do have more children and one of them is a son, I don't see much infighting if Aemma is still alive and well. She could be the glue that holds the heads of the dragon together. But anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and I will see you all next time.